Welcome back to Financial Planning Explained, and I'm your host, Mike Menninger, certified financial planner, owner, and founder of Menninger and Associates Financial Planning. And this is part 2 of the episode where a special guest, Mike Guman, former pro football player, Penn State superstar, and just an all-around great guy. I am privileged to know him and be friends with him. I was invited to his retirement dinner party. That was all great. And so in the last episode, we talked about his high school career, transitioning into college in Penn State, and we'll pick up from there. So you now just entered Penn State, and you were 1976 is when you graduated high school. So now you're at Penn State, and you're just talking about your experience. You're doing imitations of Joe Pa during the break. You said everybody could do an imitation of Joe Pa, but that he was such a stand-up guy. You want to pick up where you left off on talking about Joe Pa?
Sure. Character was very important, for him and for the type of person you were, to being accountable for your actions, that you're responsible for what you do. And, like I was saying before, we would, meeting started at 4 o'clock. You better be in your seat at 3:55. And that if it wasn't, you paid the consequences for that.
And what were the consequences?
Oh, whatever. He'd make you run after practice or something like that with that. I mean, it wasn't torturous, but, he was just trying to get his point across.
Oh, it
worked.
With
that as well.
Of course.
So he didn't tolerate, those types of things. And even, on the road trips, when we would go away and play or things like that, I mean, he wanted you to dress appropriately. You'd have a sport coat on, and they would provide one for you if you couldn't buy one or something like that, with a Penn State, Nittany lion on the pocket and things like that, because kids came from different economic backgrounds.
Sure.
Wherever they were. But he wanted you to represent yourself. You're representing the school. You're representing your family. And you're representing college football, and it was, no hats on backwards, no hoodies, none of those kind of things. You looked the part.
Which I respect.
Yeah,
but
I do too.
He's not the only coach who does that.
No, he's not.
You see that in basketball. You see that.
No question. There's wonderful coaches, that are teachers of young men. My experience was with him. I'd imagine whoever, Mike Krzyzewski, all those guys, whether it's basketball or football, that you see who have coached for a long time, that they have those same qualities, that Joe had.
Well, the person that it reminds me of, because Joe Pa obviously had his issues at the end, and everybody who knew him supported him, and the same can be said about someone even more controversial, was Bobby Knight with the Indiana. And so he was West Point, then Indiana,
right.
and got fired for throwing a chair or something. I saw it. But every player respected him utmost, and he was tough on him.
It was tough.
But he cared about him more than probably most of their parents cared about him. Yeah. And he made sure his claim to my fame was he had some ridiculously high graduation rate.
Yeah, very much so, yes. I think there's a handful of guys like that, whether Joe being one, Bobby Knight, I think of a throwback name too. I think of a guy like John Wooden.
Right.
If you ever heard...
UCLA basketball, right?
Whatever, nine national championships out of 11 years. And what he did.
Wow.
How he, tried to build quality people, by his approach to the sport.
Well, and it also makes the interaction between each of the players that much better.
Yeah, yes.
And builds a lot of unity. And coaches need to be good motivators.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever come across Bill Parcells at all?
I never played for him, played against him, when he was with the Giants. But I've heard, I know some teammates in college who played for him. And had a lot of. He was very tough, very demanding, but again, similar type of guy, even at the professional level.
Yep.
Yes.
And what I also heard is that he was notorious of bringing the best out of every player.
Yes.
And that's good.
Which is your job as a coach.
Of course.
How can you bring the best out of the people that you have playing for you?
So you get on the field as a Penn State freshman, okay? You were recruited as a safety or a running back?
A running back, offense.
You were recruited as a running back?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So...
More offense.
Okay.
Defense, yes.
Did you ever play defense?
I did.
You did?
Half of my career at Penn State, I was on defense.
Okay.
I started in my freshman year, the first 4 games of the season, when we didn't get off to a great start. I wasn't playing, but I was on defense at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And because we were struggling, and we had a very highly touted freshman recruiting class come in. You know, Sports Illustrated actually did an article on our class that they entitled Expressway to Number One. We were going to be the recruiting class to bring Joe Paterno his first national championship. And back then, they didn't rate the players like they do today, where you're 5-star, 4-star, or whatever.
Yeah.
But they had high school All-American teams, and the big one was the Parade All-American team. Do you remember you'd get your newspaper on Sunday, and the Parade magazine would be in there? And well, they would perennially pick a high school All-American football team. And I think in our recruiting class that year, we had 7 or 8 Parade All-Americans that had committed to Penn State.
Parade is that the local Philadelphia area or nationally?
No, that was a national magazine.
Wow.
That was a
Okay.
national magazine that went out. So, yeah, so we got off to a tough start. So Joe started, his philosophy at the time was freshmen shouldn't play. Even though the rules had changed a number of years before that, Archie Griffin, if you remember, the Heisman Trophy winner from Ohio State, he was the first freshman to play when they changed the rules. Freshmen weren't allowed to play.
I did not know that.
Freshmen weren't allowed to play until I think it was 1972.
Interesting.
When he was a freshman at Ohio State, and they changed the rules, and he went on to a 4-year fabulous career, you know, at Ohio State, and won the Heisman Trophy as a junior. And I think, did he win it twice? I believe he won it twice. He might have been the only guy to win it twice.
Yeah.
But Joe's philosophy was, you know, we'll let these freshmen, you know, you got to get acclimated to a new academic system, you know, to a whole new level of football and all that. You should not play. But he was sort of forced into it because the team wasn't performing well. We were 1-3. All these freshmen were biting at the bit, you know, to get some playing time. And after that 4th game, you know, he moved me from defense to offense. He put Matt Millen and Bruce Clark. Bruce was a Parade All-American out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Are they salt and pepper?
Yes.
They're salt and pepper.
They were salt and pepper.
Those are the 2 linebackers.
Put them in as linebackers.
Right.
The 2 linebackers on our defense, and we started, you know, we played Army that next week, and we won that game. I played a pretty decent amount as a freshman in the backfield, and had a good game, had 4 touchdowns, had over 100 yards rushing.
That'll wake you up.
And we won, and we got on a winning streak, you know, until our last game of the year when we played Pitt in 1976.
It used to be a big rivalry, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a huge rivalry. It was the last game of the year. It was right around Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
either that Saturday or Friday after Thanksgiving. And that year, Pitt was very, very good. Johnny Majors was a coach.
Okay.
And Tony Dorsett was a senior.
Oh, okay. I remember that name.
Dorsett won the Heisman Trophy,
Yep.
and they won the national championship.
And Marino was probably...
Marino wasn't there yet.
Yeah, he graduated in ¡83, I believe.
He wasn't there yet. Yeah, he was... he came a couple years after that.
Right, okay.
Yeah. But we had won all our games up to the Pitt game, and we lost to them in a game out at after Thanksgiving, out at Pittsburgh. Yeah.
But hey, you
that was but we ended up
7-4, I guess, 6-4.
7-4, and we ended up playing Notre Dame in the Gator Bowl that year. Dan Devine was a coach out there. Joe Montana was their quarterback.
Okay.
At Notre Dame, we played them. Ross Browner just won the Outland Trophy. Ross Browner was, you know, All-American and you know, great player at the University of Notre Dame, and we lost to them in the Gator Bowl
as a freshman.
In a close game. So we ended up, I think, what, 7-5. 7-5 that year.
How good was Notre Dame at the time? I mean, Joe Montana. What year was Joe
They
Montana?
won the national championship the next year.
Okay.
They won the next year. Joe was, I think he was a junior that year.
The year that you played him?
I think it was, yeah, he was a junior that year, I believe.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and they won the national title. The next year they played Texas in the Cotton Bowl.
Okay.
Texas had Earl Campbell.
Oh, I remember him because we had a poster on the door in my bedroom. He had 34-inch thighs.
Oh, his
Like, dude,
legs were enormous. They were the size of your waist.
Exactly.
You know?
Well, I wish my waist was 34, but yeah. So that's just.
I mean, that's
remarkable.
sort of the era. I mean, those were the names. They were big names.
Yes.
You know, in college football. You know, back in the mid to late 70s.
So back then, did you say Fiesta Bowl?
What
What was the one that you played against Notre Dame?
was the Gator Bowl?
Gator Bowl.
Gator
now,
Bowl.
Gator Bowl was sort of like the second wave.
Second tier. The
there was
big ones
the
were the
four-
rose, the orange, the sugar, and
the Cotton Bowl.
Cotton Bowl.
Right.
And then the Fiesta Bowl came in,
Okay.
which was another premier bowl game.
And that was
And
always
then the
held in
rest of them
Arizona.
were sort of like the next tier.
Yeah.
The Gator Bowl, the Liberty Bowl, you know, I can't even think of some of the
I know,
others.
and now it's so many of them.
Yeah.
There's like 40 bowl games now.
Now, yeah.
It,
There weren't as many before. you know.
I know that. And I remember it was always 4.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned the Gator Bowl, I didn't realize it was already back then that they were introducing the new bowl games.
Yeah, right. But they were fun. They were a reward. They were supposed to be a reward, you know, and to go play in those. And yeah, so my freshman year we played in the Gator Bowl. My sophomore year we played in the Fiesta Bowl. We played Arizona State
Okay.
in the Fiesta Bowl. That's the year that Notre Dame won the national title. We were 11-1, you know, but we should have gotten a higher bowl game. But the way they did it back then, we played after Thanksgiving, and all the bowl bids came out before Thanksgiving. And nobody thought we were going to beat Pitt.
Oh, you beat them that year?
My sophomore year.
Oh, okay.
My sophomore year, we beat them. My freshman year, we lost to them. They won the national
Right.
championship. My sophomore year, they had Matt Cavanaugh as the quarterback, who were some of the Elliott Walker. You know, I forget. They had a really good team, too.
Yeah.
They were very, very good. Nobody thought we would beat them. So we got a lower tier bowl bid
Right.
because they came out before we played them. And we beat them, and we ended up playing Arizona State in the Fiesta Bowl, which I think was maybe the second or third year of the Fiesta Bowl. And
Junior year was a Sugar Bowl, right?
junior year was the Sugar Bowl.
We'll come back to that. And then senior
And-
year. Did you play in a bowl game senior year?
We played in the Liberty Bowl. We
Which
played
players?
Tulane in the Liberty Bowl. My senior year, we had an off year too. I didn't play a lot my senior year. I was banged up. We had a couple guys hurt. Matt Millen was hurt. He had a bad back. He really didn't play
Oh, really?
much his senior year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
so there were some injuries, you know, which is part of the game,
Oh,
you know, with that. But it
unfortunately it is.
impacted us
Yeah.
in that year from a win-loss perspective.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to take another short break, and then we're going to come back and maybe talk a little more about that Sugar Bowl.
Sure.
Junior, the Sugar Bowl junior year, and the playoff structure we just touched upon.
Yeah.
Bowl games used to be 4, then they expanded a little bit, and now it's out of control. But there's a lot of things that I want to talk about college sports and how it's changed. So stay tuned. We'll be back with you in just a few moments.
Do you keep up regularly with your investments? Where exactly are your hard-earned dollars going? Are you financially prepared for an emergency?
I'm Mike Menninger, founder of Menninger and Associates Financial Planning. We believe that education and knowledge are powerful, and we want our clients to understand why we are making the recommendations that we make. It's your money, and you deserve to know where it's going, because it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. So call us today to discuss your financial concerns. Welcome back to Financial Plan and Explain with Mike Guman. And he, during break, was going off on all this cool stuff that I said, save it for this. So, the 1979 Sugar Bowl, I will have you know that, you know, I joke with you about it and you handle it really well. But the irony of it is that I looked you up on Wikipedia and it said, Michael Guman graduated from Bethlehem Catholic in 1976 and went to Penn State, and he's most famously known for, I don't know about most famously, known for the Sugar Bowl. Do you want to talk to me about, you were talking a little bit about, at the time, there were only a small handful of bowl games, the 4 major bowl games, which we talked about, but that you were saying, and I didn't realize this, how much politicking was going on. I didn't know that.
Well, for just the situation as it stood in the 78-79 season, we had a wonderful season. We were 11-0 that year, and again, it climaxed with the Pitt game, the last game of the season,
right,
that we had, where we had to win to go 11-0. We were ranked number 1 in the country, and to get a shot at, the national championship, to do that. So we had to win that game against Pitt, which was a tough opponent that time around too. But we did win that. We were 11-0. We were riding high, number 1 ranked team in the country, and now it was like, okay, where do we go and who do we play? And you wouldn't really realize, the politicking that happens with that, because who are we going to play? Well, Oklahoma, Barry Switzer, with them, they were 11. They had a 1 loss. They were 11-1. They had a great team. They had Billy Sims, who was a Heisman Trophy winner.
Right.
And they had a great offense and defense and such. But to play them, we would go to the Orange Bowl. Alabama, Bear Bryant, and his team, they had 1 loss. Do we play them? And go to the Sugar Bowl, down in New Orleans to play. So I know Joe was probably on the phone a lot, talking with the representatives from those bowl games and with the coaches and things like that.
The coaches of the other teams?
I think so, yeah.
Really?
I think they would talk a little bit and things like that. They all knew each other.
I'm sure they
all
do.
Those guys. And, but there was a lot of politicking that went back and forth as to which was the best direction to go and to play. And it ended up, being that I guess he chose pretty much, that would be the best course to go to Sugar Bowl to play Alabama.
And Alabama was ranked number 2.
I think they were.
The irony, I remember it back then, at the end of the year, it was still subjective as to who do they think is number 1, and would have been easy. Were you the only undefeated team that year?
It always was subjective. Yeah, we were undefeated. But even in that game, and the famous play is the goal line stand, in that play where the score was 14-7. If I would have scored, we wouldn't have won the game. We would have tied the game.
You would have tied the game, right.
We would have tied the game. But
still needed the extra point, too.
We would have had to kick the extra point. You're right. We would have had to do that, but we would be 11-0-1 versus 11-1. I mean, do you split it? Would we have split it with?
Oh, wait a minute. So I didn't realize that at the time they didn't have overtime.
No, there was no overtime.
No overtime at all?
No overtime.
Really?
It would have been a tie.
That would have been...
It would have ended in a tie. So that year, actually, then, Alabama shared the national championship with USC.
Okay.
It wasn't a unanimous...
Interesting.
Because you had, again, like you said, Mike, you had the AP, the sports writers picked, and there was a coaches poll, too.
And one had
Alabama, one had USC.
Wow.
My coach with the Rams, John Robinson, was coaching at USC at the time, and they had Charlie White, who won.
Also a Heisman Trophy.
He won the Heisman Trophy winner that year, his senior year. Billy Sims, who was a senior that year too with Oklahoma, he won it his junior year.
Right.
But Charlie ended up winning it his senior year.
Some pretty big names.
Yeah, definitely. But that's sort of how it played out. It was all by voting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I watched actually that whole scene. You guys were first and goal at like the 2 or 3 yard line, weren't you?
Yeah, we were.
You rolled out 2 or 3 times to the flats on the right, and then you were the final play.
Yeah, I was. Yes, I was a 4th down play. Matsui carried on 3rd down. I don't even remember what plays we ran on.
I think there was a pass to the tight end in the flats, and he got taken out of bounds or something like that, or tackled.
Yeah, it was
the 1 or 2.
It was actually a wide receiver with Scott Fitzke.
Okay.
Who was our? I think he caught the ball and got it down to that point. So I think we went 3rd down up the middle and 4th down up the middle.
Yeah.
and didn't
Well,
work out.
The irony of it is in the same article they said, as voted at the time by ESPN in 2002, they said that was the best bowl game in history.
Yeah, it was a very hard-fought game.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lot of offense on either side.
Well, two
I
good
believe,
defenses.
yeah,
would do
I
that.
believe, yeah, and you did have two very, very good defenses that were playing that day, and I think one of their scores that they had was on a punt return
Oh,
for
really?
a touchdown. Yeah, so I think there were just two offensive touchdowns in that
Wow.
game. We had one, and they had one,
Right.
but their other score was from I believe it was a punt return.
Football back then was also a little bit more defensive oriented and run oriented,
Yeah.
whereas today it's a little bit more pass.
Yeah, it's a lot more wide open today than it was back then. You threw the ball if, our quarterback threw 20 passes a game. That was a lot.
Yeah.
so,
Definitely.
And I mean, that just wasn't at Penn State. That was sort of across.
But he's
college
even
football.
the NFL.
Yeah,
Even the NFL.
Even
at
the
the time.
NFL, it wasn't. Yeah, the rules were a little different and all those types of things.
So
yeah,
now-
it made it harder.
Back then was sort of the coaches poll. Eventually, then they had the coaches they would pick the top two teams to play each other, and they would pick that particular bowl game to be the national championship. A handful of years ago, which I really liked that they expanded it to 4.
Right.
And now that I liked it even better. I couldn't wait. Now it's a 12. Okay. Penn State, unfortunately, lost to Oregon, but now they got 12. I love this because what it truly is now is a playoff system.
Yes.
And you're taking teams that believe they should be in the picture, who were left out of the picture before. You're rewarding each of the 5 major conferences an automatic bid, kind of like they do in basketball.
Mm-hmm.
But you're truly making a tournament of the top teams. I just think it's so much better. Share your thoughts on it.
I think it's wonderful. The 4 team, it was taking the first step to get to a playoff system,
Right.
to get the 4 teams. There was always controversy about who the 4 teams should be.
Sure.
They
Number
didn't have
5
a-
is always going to be disappointed.
Yeah, yes. And the expansion of that, I think, makes it even that much more interesting for the viewing public, to watch. And now you have teams that, who would ever thought that SMU was going to be in the first playoff of 12-team format? Who would have thought it would be Boise State, and teams like that
Yeah.
that are in this playoff who have had fantastic years.
Absolutely.
And they deserve to be in. But if you had just pure voting or voting rights and things like that, I don't know if it all would have shaken out that way.
Well, supposedly SMU has 2 losses. Both of their losses were late field goals,
Yes.
game-winning field goals by the other team. But then you could also argue that their strength of schedule is not that difficult
Mhm.
relative to Alabama and all of the SEC teams. I mean, we were talking about it earlier that towards the end of the season, 4 of the top 5 teams were Big Ten, and 9 of the top 11 were either Big Ten or SEC. These are juggernauts having to battle each other
Week in
every
and
week.
out. Yeah.
And, it's going to knock the Ohio States, the Penn States, all the SEC teams. I mean, look at who did Alabama lose to? They lost at Tennessee, I believe, South Carolina, and Georgia. Come on.
Mhm.
Okay. They got knocked out.
I guess the argument against that, that you say is, well, you are in the SEC for that reason. They've expanded those conferences. You sign your own media deals for billions and
Oh,
billions
yeah.
of dollars. You're getting rewarded during the season with money, to play all those teams. Now you got to win.
Well, you know what? Hey, by the way,
You got to win. You got to be in the top
shouldn't have lost
One or-
those games.
1 or 2 of those teams or 3 of those
I know.
teams in the SEC or the Big Ten, to qualify. And if you don't, you don't. And, that lets, I don't want to say sneak in, but lets an SMU
Right.
or someone who's not as high profile, let's just put it that way.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how they do because you see that also in the NCAA basketball
Yeah,
tournament.
well, there's always those.
The mid-majors, they refer to
Of
it.
course,
And
yes.
the mid-majors teams, there's always 1 or 2 teams that come out, you want to give them a chance. And that's what this new format does.
It definitely does. I like it. I think it's going to be very well received this year. Even the fact that some of the teams get to host a home game,
Yeah.
I think is wonderful.
Yeah.
That they do that. So I think it's going to be a very exciting playoff system.
So last but not least, and actually, you know what? We're going to take this into the next episode because this one's off. This one's over. There are two things that I want to talk about as we transition kind of from college to pros. I'm going to tease like they do on TV all the time. I'm going to tease the viewers. We're going to talk about the two, what I would characterize as the controversial, and I personally don't like them, topics. And it's not that I don't like the topics. I don't like what's going on. Is NIL and
The transfer portal.
So we're going to kick that off in the next episode. Thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to catching up with you, with Mike, on our next episode of Financial Planning Explained. You have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week.